I stepped out onto the porch of my mountain cabin in Pine Hollow, Virginia, expecting the familiar scent of cedar and the sight of dawn breaking over the ridge. Instead, the air carried the sharp tang of sawdust and ruin. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand as I stared at the wreckage where my cabin once stood, a heap of shattered beams, twisted metal roofing, and splintered memories. The single oak post, where my late wife, Ellen, and I had carved our initials during our first summer here, jutted out like a gravestone. This wasn't just a building. It was Ellen's sanctuary, where she'd sketched the valley's wildflowers, where I'd taught our granddaughter, Sophie, to skip stones across the creek. Now, it was rubble. Standing beside the debris was Margaret Voss, president of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association, an organization I'd never joined, never paid, and wanted nothing to do with. Her crisp blazer and smug smile were as sharp as the clipboard she clutched like a weapon. "We warned you, Tom," she said, her voice laced with mock pity. "Non-payment of dues has consequences." She handed me a notice stamped with bold red letters, "Final lien and enforcement action." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me with a paper that meant nothing and a pile of wood that meant everything. The cabin was Ellen's haven, the one place where the ache of her loss didn't suffocate me. After she passed 2 years ago, I'd come here to feel her presence, to hear Sophie giggle as she chased fireflies by the creek. That morning in April 2024, it felt like Margaret had bulldozed my heart. I stumbled back to my main house, hands trembling as I dialed the county records office. The clerk's voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Harper, your parcel, number 42C, has no HOA covenants. Never has." Relief hit me like a wave, but it was short-lived. Margaret's car rolled into my driveway an hour later. She didn't bother getting out, just shouted from her window, "We formed the Pine Hollow HOA 4 years ago. Tom, your property was included in our master plan. You got the notice. You didn't contest it. You're in." It was a lie so bold it stole my Brea, the scam built on junk mail I'd tossed without a second glance. She thought I was just an old widower, too broken to fight. She was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the rubble burned behind my eyes. Ellen's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let them break you, Tom." At 3 a.m., I pulled on my boots and headed to the shed, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Under a flickering bulb, I dug out an old metal box, its contents untouched for years, deeds from the 1960s, plat maps, and a topographic survey I'd commissioned for a waterline project. Spreading the main plat map across my workbench, I traced the faded lines of Pine Hollow's original boundaries. A slow, fierce smile spread across my face. Margaret thought she ruled this valley. She didn't know she was just a squatter on my land. The next day, I went door to door, not as a victim, but as a neighbor with a question. "When did you join the HOA?" At the first house, Emily, a single mom, whispered about a $250 fine for her daughter's bike left on the grass. At the next, George, a retired welder, spat out his story of a lien on his home because his RV was an inch too wide for Margaret's rulebook. Every neighbor told the same tale, fearful, bullied, trapped by Margaret's dents. Deceitful notices slipped into their mail. She'd built her empire on intimidation, but I was done with her games. I called my old Navy buddy, Jack Hawk Reynolds, a lawyer who could shred a contract with a glance. Over coffee in his cluttered kitchen, I laid out the maps and Margaret's sham lien. Hawk's eyes gleamed. "Tom, this isn't a lawsuit. It's a reckoning." A week later, Hawk's cease and desist letter landed at Margaret's doorstep. declaring her HOA a fraud and the demolition a crime. For a moment, I thought she'd back off. Instead, she doubled down. Orange signs sprouted on my fence. Community violation, non-compliant property. A county inspector showed up, tipped off by an anonymous complaint about my wiring another of Margaret's stabs. He found nothing, but the harassment didn't stop. Then, one evening, my lights flickered out. I caught Greg Holt, Margaret's wannabe cop sidekick, walking away from my breaker box with wire cutters. Shrugging. HOA orders. Faulty wiring. That was the breaking point. I went back to the rubble, desperate to salvage anything. Buried in the debris, I found the cedar box that held Ellen's ashes, cracked. Empty. Her memory swept into the dirt. They hadn't just torn down a cabin. They desecrated her. My fight wasn't about property anymore. It was about vengeance. I buried myself in the county records office, poring over dusty plat books and microfiche. Deep in a 1979 file labeled Pine Hollow Trust Dissolution, I found gold. The original developer had placed all common areas, roads, green spaces, the creek path into a trust. When it dissolved, a clause transferred ownership to a backup entity, Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. 20 years ago, I'd bought a foreclosed lot through that same LLC, a forgotten shell company I'd set up for tax purposes. By some twist of fate, I owned every inch of Margaret's so-called community property. She'd built her HOA on a flimsy digital map, never checking the original deeds. She was a queen on borrowed land. While I pieced this together, Margaret tightened her grip. George's RV was towed for being parked on HOA land, his own driveway. Neighbors got fines for mailboxes painted the wrong shade. Then came her final blow, a $92,000 demand letter for demolition costs, retroactive dues, and fines slipped into my mailbox like a venomous snake. She even hammered new signs into the ground. Private HOA property, no trespassing. Watching her direct workers with smug satisfaction, I felt the weight of doubt. Was I too old for this fight? But then Sophie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, stared at the rubble and asked, "Why did that lady take Grandma's place away?" Her small, heartbroken voice reignited my fire. My first move was quiet. With Hawk's title agent, we filed actions to update the county records, transferring the common lands to Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. It cost me $4,000, a gamble that felt like betting my soul. Then, I sent anonymous invitations to a community information session at the local library. Margaret, predictably, hijacked it, announcing her own mandatory HOA meeting to address my noncompliance. She walked right into my trap. The library room buzzed with tension. 60 neighbors, some loyal to Margaret, others fed up. She sat at a table, flanked by Greg and her secretary, radiating false authority. I waited in the hall with Hawk and Clara Brooks, a retired county planner. At 7 p.m., we entered, holding folders. Margaret banged her gavel, declaring the meeting hers and my $92,000 debt the agenda. I stepped forward. "This isn't your meeting, Margaret." I called it to share what I found at the county. Clara unrolled a 1979 plat map, explaining that Margaret's HOA had no legal standing, no covenants, no power. Hawk added, "You can't levy fines or liens." I pointed to the map's roads and paths. "This isn't community land. It's mine." I held up the deed, declaring her easements revoked. The room exploded in gasps. Margaret's face crumpled as neighbors turned on her. The next morning, I met a fencing crew at the valley entrance. sinking 8-foot chain-link posts into my land. Margaret screeched, "This is community property." I handed her the easement revocation. "Not anymore." Greg backed off when the crew's foreman threatened to call the sheriff. That afternoon, my Navy buddies, now electricians, locked out Margaret's sprinklers and signed lights non-essential systems on my property. When deputies arrived, I showed them the deed. "This is a civil matter," they told Margaret. "You're trespassing." That evening, I mailed every neighbor a letter. "You're free from the HOA. No more dues." I proposed a voluntary council with no fees. Calls flooded in George. Emily. Dozens more. Their relief palpable. Margaret's final stand was a desperate emergency meeting. I'd tipped off Lisa Carter, a local TikTok journalist exposing small-town corruption. She filmed discreetly as Margaret ranted, calling me a terrorist. I played a recording of her former treasurer admitting to forged documents. Then, drone footage showed the illegal demolition permits. No notices. The county inspector, my guest, confirmed it was criminal. Margaret snapped, screaming, "This is my HOA." As papers flew and her gavel hit the floor, deputies escorted her out, handcuffs glinting, as the room erupted in applause. Lisa's video went viral 200,000 views in days. The DA charged Margaret with felony property destruction and fraud. My lawsuit won damages to rebuild and compensate for Ellen's desecrated ashes. Margaret fled town, her empire dust. Rebuilding wasn't just about lumber. George brought tools. Emily's husband framed walls. Neighbors turned the cabin into a fortress, stronger than before. We placed a cedar bench by the creek, engraved Ellen's place. I dissolved Ridgeview Holdings, transferring the land to a community trust, forever HOA-proof. At the first council meeting in my new cabin, George was voted president. Peace returned. One morning, I took Sophie fishing. Her rod jerked, pulling up a shimmering perch. Her joy mirrored Ellen's. Justice wasn't just a deed or a courtroom, it was this moment. This community, rebuilt stronger. What do you think? Did I go too far fencing off the valley? Should Margaret face jail time? Or was public shame enough? Would you fight like this for a place you love? Drop your thoughts below. Hit like if you're rooting for justice. And subscribe, you won't want to miss what's next.